Where we're headed with this, folks, is that with no exceptions in the history of the world, going back to the 8th century in China, any country that had irredeemable paper ticket money saw that purchasing power of that money approach its cost of production, which is near zero. And there have been no exceptions, and there's no reason at all why our system should, the current system we have, should be an exception either. And go to slide number 4, please. This is a street scene, I'm told, from Hungary in the 1940s, and that stuff that guy is sweeping into the sewer, that's the Hungarian money of the day. And those people standing around in the background, they might have been saving that Hungarian money just the way we save $50 bills, $100 bills, and here a whole lifetime's worth of savings literally down the sewer. And go to the next slide, please. It's slide number 5. This is a very famous scene from Weimar, Germany. And here the paper money of the day had more value for heat than it had for its nominal value. And slide 6, please. And these kids, they're not playing with blocks. They're playing with bundles of the German money. And the next slide, again, bundles of the German money. And the next slide, 8. Here this woman is burning the money to heat her food. Go to the next slide. This is a current scene today in Zimbabwe where the paper ticket money is depreciating. And here this fellow is buying lunch with all, and it's like a big joke. And go to the next slide, please. This is a spoof showing you what happens to the paper money. It's a spoof because it has Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke's picture on it, a $500 million bill. And notice also that these bills expire. I mean, they're not even good. Now, when the money collapses, folks, you can't imagine how quickly people try to convert it into something real. Go to the next slide, please. This is a supermarket scene in Zimbabwe. And a couple of weeks ago, I made a presentation. There was somebody in the audience from Russia who, in 1998, where the Russian ruble collapsed, he said everything was okay in the morning. In the afternoon, it was over. So it's like a swarm of locusts, swoop down, and people go into a panic to convert their money into whatever they can convert. The money does not depreciate slowly. And go to the next slide, please. Slide number 12. In 1997, then Federal Reserve Chairman Greenspan gave a remarkable speech in Belgium. He gave it in FedSpeak. And one of the things that he brought up in this lecture, 5 times he mentioned that the Federal Reserve can create money and will create money, his exact words, without limit, in order to bail the banking system should the need arise. He also spoke about subsidies to the banking system. By definition, a subsidy is wealth transfer. And also the banking guys are richer than the rest of us. Why are we transferring wealth from ordinary poorer people to richer people? But the question that this raised to me, and I wrote a little book about it, it's called What Does Mr. Greenspan Really Think? It's a free download off the fame.org website, or if you don't want to print it out, you can get it from Barnes & Noble. What this meant to me is that if the Federal Reserve can print money or create money without limit, what happens to the purchasing power of money that exists, that people have saved? And more importantly, what happens to the purchasing power of money that's been promised for future payment? And the answer is that purchasing power goes to zero. Go to the next slide, please. There's only one politician at the national level who's raised any of these issues, and that's Congressman Ron Paul, our hero in the Congress from Texas. He is the only one to talk about the depreciation of the dollar and the perils of the fiat money. And typically what the financial guys have done is they've tried to position him as if he's some kind of kook. Well, Dr. Paul has this correct. And another fellow who really lends credibility to what I'm saying now, go to the next slide, please, slide 14, is former chairman of the Federal Reserve System, Paul Volcker. And he gave a speech a couple of months ago rather, here in New York. I was there, and he said flat out, the new financial system has failed the test of the marketplace. They know that the system has failed at the top. And all this business with all these bailouts for the banks, for the investment banks, all they're trying to do is restart something which has been enormously profitable for financial sector participants. Later in my presentation, you'll see how profitable. It's unfathomable how much wealth has gone to these folks. And all of that is just wealth transfer off the backs of ordinary people, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit now to give you a little background on the malfeasance, on the dishonesty in the system. You go to slide 15. Just about everybody in our country, and certainly around the world, believes the dollar can be anything the Congress wants to make it. And parenthetically, I'm indebted to the very good work that Dr. Edwin Vieira has done on this issue. He is the author, it wasn't stated earlier, of the magnificent thesis of aid, the monetary powers and disabilities of the Constitution. And some of this stuff I've gotten from him, and again, he really has earned our thanks. So, it turns out that the dollar is mentioned twice in the Constitution. Go to slide 16. But it is not defined in the Constitution. It's mentioned in connection with the slave tax, which is no more, but much more importantly, it's mentioned in the 7th Amendment, which guarantees you a right to a trial by jury for any dispute $20 or more. Now, if it were true that the Congress could redefine the dollar, that would mean that the Congress could redefine the 7th Amendment, which is ridiculous. And in fact, for the 7th Amendment to have any objective meaning, then the dollar has to have objective meaning. So what is this Constitution talking about when it mentions the dollar? And go to the next slide, please. And the Constitution is referring to the Spanish mill dollar, and this is what it looked like at the time. So the Spanish had set up mints in the colonies from the 16th, 17th century on, and the Spanish mill dollar was ubiquitous. And this is the dollar, again, that people used in ordinary transactions, and is the dollar referred to in the Constitution. And further evidence of that, go to the next slide, please, from to slide 18. This is an example of the money that the Continental Congress issued in order to help finance the revolution. Now notice it says it's a $50 bill, and if you can read the writing, it says the bearer is entitled to receive 50 Spanish mill dollars, or the equivalent sum in gold and silver. That's what they're talking about, the dollar, the Spanish mill dollar. And go to the next slide, please, slide number 19. This is a better example. This is a $30 bill, and it says this bill entitles the bearer to receive 30 Spanish mill dollars or the value thereof. Now this phrase, the value thereof, is important because it's repeated in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. When they talk about the value of a $30 bill, they're not talking about the purchasing power. They're talking about the specie content, the silver content. And go to the next slide, please. And this is further substantiated by the Coinage Act of 1792, written by Alexander Hamilton. And here, for the very first time, we see the definition of a dollar. Hamilton defines the dollar as the value of a Spanish mill dollar, 371.25 grains of silver. So that is the dollar in law. Any representation of a dollar being something else is a misrepresentation. And go to slide 21, please. And so by law, we have this 370 prohibiting paper money, not giving the government to issue paper money. And I want to tell you a story about Thomas Jefferson. The source of this story, by the way, comes from a wonderful book. It's called Principle and Interest, Principle L.E. The subtitle should have been the title of the book. It's Thomas Jefferson's View of Debt. And the author is Herbert Sloan. He's the head of the history department at Barnard College in Columbia. So it seems that Jefferson was married to a woman whose father was one of the richest men in the colonies. And her father had made his fortune primarily from slave trading, and he was also a very large plantation owner in Virginia. And he died roughly around 1772, 73, I forget, it doesn't matter for the story. He left a huge estate. The assets were £37,000, again consisting of slaves and plantations. And the liabilities were £20,000, money that he owed to financiers of Britain. And he made Jefferson the executor of the estate. Now, to give you a feel for how much money that was in those days, £100 was a good year's salary for a skilled tradesman. So we're talking about, in our money, tens of millions of dollars in purchasing power. In those days, and today as well, if an executor distributes the assets of an estate without settling out the liabilities, he becomes personally liable for the liabilities. However, in this case, the assets were so much greater than the liabilities, and besides Jefferson's wife and two brothers, they wanted their share. Jefferson was comfortable in doing that. And so he sold the slaves and the plantations for the £37,000. However, in Virginia in those days, people didn't have that kind of money. And the way they would make a purchase of this genre is what we call today a seller's mortgage or vendor financing. In those days, the terminology was that the buyer would issue a bond to the seller